What's going on, my beautiful viewers? And I am here today to do a little bit of a different topic, kind of a different video actually in general. So last week, one of my viewers sent me this really interesting link to this research paper that was published on Isekai anime. This was something I was not expecting. I took a little bit of a skim through it, and this seems really legit. Like, this is some serious research that was done here on Isekai anime. I thought instead of just like reading it myself and, making a video just after the fact, I thought it'd be more fun to kind of like go through it in the video itself, and we can kind of like discuss this stuff in real time. This seems cool. Like, I'm actually really interested in the fact that there was a research paper published on Isekai anime. So I'm hyped for this. Let's get into it. Okay, so the survey that was done in this paper has 746 manga series and anime series, I guess, on friggin' Isekai. That's all. God, there's so many Isekais. Starting off here, really interesting. We have this graph here showing the publications of Isekai manga and anime. This site reports that 385 Isekai manga series were published in the years 2017 to 2019, or roughly one new series every 3 days. Oh my God! There is a massive jump from 2016 to 2017. That is huge! And it looks like the anime itself like spiked up, but then it kind of leveled out, but then 2019 it went up real high. So hold on, wait, when did season 1 of SAO come out? The first season of SAO came out in 2012. I honestly thought the Isekai production would go up after SAO. Well, it looks like, because if you see 2012 and then 2013, there's a massive spike in Isekai anime right there. Because I really think that SAO was the one that like made Isekai like the mainstream genre it now is. So now we're getting to a section of the paper where they like kind of define what Isekai is. And actually, that's an interesting subject, because I had a talk with my sister about this actually, is like, what exactly is the Isekai genre? I don't really think of it as a genre. I mean, it really isn't, because really what Isekai is a story element, because you can have Isekais of all different types of genres. You can have sci-fi Isekai, you can have fantasy Isekai, you can have historical Isekai. It's not really a genre in and of itself. I think it's like just a story element that can be tacked on to any other genre. So it's almost like Isekai could be a subgenre of every other genre. Yeah, because otherworld stories are only defined by setting, they are not limited to any specific topic and can include stories from diverse genres such as adventure, romance, erotica, horror, mystery, humor, and satire. Exactly, that's what I was saying. So while otherworld stories can be diverse, manga series identified by publishers, reviewers, and fans as Isekai all fall into the genre of speculative fiction. I mean, that's a pretty wide, thing there. Trends in the use of terms in Google searches indicate that such use of Isekai as a story type was rare and sporadic before 2013. After 2013, the use of the term rapidly increased. That makes sense because, like I said, I think SAO is really the reason that all this stuff took off. So I guess after SAO came out in 2012, bleeding over into 2013, Isekai just kind of became like the label, and people started, saying things as Isekai. Like, if you think about it, Inuyasha is an Isekai anime that's pretty old, but like, I never thought of it as an Isekai anime until like after SAO. Wow, yeah, the frequency of the use of Isekai as a Google search term, like after, wow, it's just spiking up. I mean, yeah, the Isekai genre right now is this is like the golden time of Isekai, and I don't mean in terms of everything that comes out is good, because it's not, but just in terms of sheer quantity, we are in the golden age of Isekai. I mean, they're even making a Suicide Squad Isekai, which is going to be amazing. Now we're delving into fantasy specifically. Stories set in the real world but have some fantastical element are considered to be low fantasies, and stories that occur in worlds that are separate from the real world are considered high fantasies. By definition, Isekai manga are categorized as high fantasy since they deal with other worlds. I mean, does that account for reverse Isekai? Like if The Devil is a Part-Timer takes place in our world, and there's a lot of fantastical stuff that goes on, but it's still the real world. I mean, like pretty much every reverse Isekai is like that, so would reverse Isekais be counted as low fantasies in that sense? The Isekais where the protag is transported to the other world that makes sense as high fantasy, but what about like reverse isekais? Zvetin Dordorov divides fantasy into 3 categories: the uncanny, where events may seem supernatural but are found to be due to natural processes; the marvelous, where the events are in fact supernatural; and the fantastic, where the nature of the events are not resolved. Isekai stories are assigned to the category of the marvelous. Is that true too? Because couldn't it be fantastic? Because like there's a couple of isekai things where like the actual method of them being isekai'd, like it's not really explained. Ray Zero, for example, where like he just is teleported and there's no explanation for why that happened. Like there's no real reason for why Subaru was brought to the new world. It just happened. So would that be fantastic? That may be a point of debate there. Okay, now we're going into the types of isekais, which is, I'm really interested in this. Farah Mendelssohn's framework for organizing fantasy is particularly useful for studying isekai stories. She proposes dividing fantasy stories into 4 types: portal, quest, immersive, intrusion, and liminal. In portal quest stories, the protagonist encounters the marvelous in an isekai that is entered by passing through a portal. The protagonist may or may not cross back through the portal, but the marvelous does not enter the real world. The anime movie Spirited Away is a portal quest story, as are the isekai manga series Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody and In Another World with My Smartphone. I find it funny that he picked two of probably the most trashiest isekai in my opinion. I would say the majority of isekai falls into that category if we're going to go with this categorization system. In immersive stories, there is no portal between the marvelous and the real world, and all events occur in the marvelous world. Okay, that doesn't sound like isekai at all to me. That just sounds like a fantasy story. And that's something I think people need to be mindful of when they talk about the isekai genre, because it is true that a vast majority of isekai stories are in a fantasy world. But that doesn't mean that all fantasy anime are isekais. I'll give you an example. Several weeks ago, someone was talking to me about Solo Leveling, the anime coming out, and they described it as an isekai anime. And I was just like, I don't think that is an isekai anime, because it's just about like this different world, this different fantasy world. Like the whole thing that makes an isekai is someone being transported from one world to another world. That's the whole thing that makes it an isekai. If it's just taking place in this fantasy world, that's not an isekai, because it's all people that inhabit this world and it's all their world. Lord of the Rings isn't an isekai because it's all people that are from the world of Arda and stuff like that. Like there's no person from our world that's inserted into the world of Lord of the Rings or anything like that. I don't think I'd count that category as isekai. That just sounds like fantasy anime to me. In intrusion stories, the marvelous enters the real world from the isekai, resulting in changes that must be negotiated. Okay, so this is reverse isekai. The Tale of Princess Kaguya and the isekai manga series The Devil is a Part-Timer are intrusion stories. Okay, yeah, so reverse isekai are the intrusion stories. So we actually have already made up our own name for that, because reverse isekai is a fan term, but you know, we kind of already did that ourselves. In liminal stories, the portal becomes a liminal space where reality and the marvelous isekai mix. Isekai manga series that fall into this category include the series Alternate World Bar, never heard of that one, and Restaurant to Another World. Okay, yeah, I've seen that one. We have a really cool diagram here. I'll zoom in on this. Portal is when you're teleported to the isekai. So, you know, typical examples, Mushoku Tensei, Tanya the Saga of the Evil, Drifters, Overlord, those are all portal isekai. Immersive is not an isekai genre. I don't count that as an isekai genre. I think that's wrong. Intrusion is reverse isekai. And liminal, I guess, is where you can go back and forth, like, freely. So, I guess, like, Gate would be a good example of a liminal isekai that I've seen. Maybe even like I got a cheat skill in Another World and became unrivaled in the real world too, because he goes back and forth and he brings things from the old world, the new world into the Earth. So I guess that would count. So this categorization of isekai has nothing to do with what the story's about. It's just how the portal and how things are teleported from, you know, the real world to the other world. I mean, it's a little broad, and there's obviously several subcategories we could dive down into, but that's a pretty good system. They're talking about how the advent of gaming has influenced isekai anime. It's saying that there's 2 real types of the gamic worlds. They call it the shonen game, which is like, I guess, targeted towards young men. And then there's otome games, which are like, you know, targeted towards women. Stories set in the shonen and otome worlds enjoy a rich intertextuality reality. The use of key tropes and visual cues in the beginning of the manga series conveys to the reader that the story is set in a standard gaming world. Think about how many isekai have game elements to them. There's I would say the vast majority of isekai take place in these gaming worlds. So I would say that's definitely a valid research subject, is just how often that happens. It's basically just people being transported to the isekai and being in a video game. Okay, this is interesting. Surprisingly, computer role-playing games in themselves are not Portal Quest stories. They are immersive stories. The player, as part of the initial steps of setting up the game, resigns their humanity and becomes a player who is perhaps inexperienced but is a native of the isekai with no connection to the real world or to the player's life in the real world. Fictionalized versions of role-playing games therefore tend to be immersive as well. So like I said, they're not actually isekai. This guy keeps calling them isekais. I don't view them as isekais. That's where I'm gonna have to disagree with this paper. But I basically, that's the difference between a fantasy anime and an isekai fantasy anime. In summary, isekai is a term referring to a literary genre of manga, anime, and light novels. Appears to have begun around 2013. Initially, it was associated with Portal Quest stories that involve a gaming world, so like Dot Hack and stuff like that. Since that time, the isekai genre has been extended to include all Portal Quest fantasies created at any time, and all immersive, invasion, and liminal stories that involve a gaming world. Okay, so the definition of isekai has grown in years, is what this guy's saying. Narrative consumption is the act of reading small narratives not only for direct enjoyment, but also as a way of accessing a grand narrative. A grand narrative is an overarching story that provides the framework for smaller stories and is only accessed by the consumption of the small narratives. Isekai manga appear to be an example of a collection of small narratives created from a grand non-narrative. There is no grand narrative to isekai stories. The specifics are either taken from earlier isekai stories or are variants of earlier works. As a result, the reader of isekai stories has the expectation that plots, tropes, characters, and character designs will be drawn from a comic tradition. Okay, so I guess that's kind of just drawing on how generic a lot of isekais are. I don't know if I agree with there being no grand narrative to isekai stories. I mean, maybe I'm just understanding the concept incorrectly here, but like Drifters would be a great example of what I think the grand narrative of Drifters is the war against the Ends and the Drifters and how there's this world war going on, but all the smaller narratives are kind of like these little stories between the little groups of drifters. Like we have Toyohisa and Nobunaga and Yoichi, but then over there we have Butch Cassidy, and then over here we have Hannibal and Scipio. So I don't really understand what he's saying by isekais don't have a grand narrative. Like, maybe I'm understanding the concept wrong here. Maybe you guys are picking up on something that I'm not. Okay, so now we're getting into the actual survey of the information that they did. A total of 1,010 series from Japan, Korea, and China were identified by internet sites as isekai stories. Okay, so wow, they definitely put effort into this statistical analysis. So when I was getting my master's degree, I had to do market research like this, and I was on the data analytics side of that. So this is kind of fun to see this applied. I would have loved to do something like this in college. This would have been really fun. The questions in this survey fall into the following areas: demographics, method of entering the isekai, characteristics of the isekai, characteristics of the protagonist in the isekai, and interpersonal relationships in the isekai. Ooh, so now we're getting into isekai trends. So these were all portal type isekais, which is probably the largest sample size, which makes sense because even without doing a survey, I could, just from the amount of isekai I've seen, I think it's safe to say that Portal Quest isekais are easily the most plentiful. The survey found that protagonists include women and men from junior high age to the elderly, but the largest group are adult males, 41%. The ratio of male to female protagonists is 2.4 to 1, and the ratio of adult to teenage protagonists is 1.4 to 1. Okay, really? There's more adult protagonists than teenage protagonists. That is shocking. Yeah, they're freaking losers, usually, most of the time. In isekais, the world's finest assassin gets reincarnated in another world as an aristocrat. I remember I singled that out because I was like, it's like one of the only isekais I've seen where before he gets reincarnated, he's not just like some neat or some dude that doesn't have a good life. He's like a badass globe-trotting assassin. So like that makes sense that this is the finding. Only 8% are presented as either having a life characterized by positive elements or as being successful in their careers. Oh boy. Adult protagonists are sometimes identified in terms of their profession: doctor, scientist, lawyer. Okay, yeah. These identifications typically become important for the subsequent events in the isekai. So like, I guess like Parallel World Pharmacy would be a good example of that, because it's a pharmacist, and basically the whole plot is just him developing like medicines for application in this medieval world. The mechanisms for entering the isekai in the stories fall into 6 categories: reincarnation, divine act, summoning, specific tool, pulled into game, and no explanation. Okay, so reincarnation takes advantage of the fact that the individuals living different lives in the different worlds can have the same soul. As a result, the protagonist is a character in the isekai who simply remembers their past life in modern day Japan. That has to be the most common one. That has to be. A divine act occurs when a god or god-like agent causes the protagonist to enter the isekai. Actually, you know what? That one's pretty common too. Summoning occurs when a character in the isekai pulls the protagonist into the isekai. Yeah, I honestly haven't seen too many of those. I guess the one that comes off the top of my head was like Cautious Hero, I guess. Well, no, that's a god. What is one where someone is summoned by people, like not a non-god-like being? I can't think of one right now. Specific tools that transfer the protagonist to the isekai include magical items such as stones or jewels, doors, books, scrolls, or mirrors. Okay, so I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world too would be an example of a tool one, I guess, because it's a house or the door or whatever that lets him transport to the other new world. The tools make the protagonist a victim and focus the plot on the tool and often the request to return home. I don't think that's true all the time. I mean, like I said, that example I just gave you, he's not a victim of that at all. Actually, he's freaking killing it because of it. Being pulled into a game is a method that takes advantage of the ease of visualizing moving from playing a specific game to actually being in that game. This method also satisfies the fantasy of never having to leave the game and returning to the real world. So like Log Horizon would be an example of that, and of course SAO. The final category is no explanation. When there is no explanation for how the protagonist enters the isekai, the entering becomes part of the isekai and is a marvelous act. Alright, so yeah, that's Re:Zero. Re:Zero is an example. He's just there, and there's no explanation for why he's there. He's there though, and that's it. These mechanisms are not mutually exclusive. A goddess may act to reincarnate a person in the isekai as an infant with their memories intact, or a god may intervene in a malicious summoning. I guess a god intervening in a malicious summoning would that be like Tsukimichi? But he was summoned by the god of that new world, so that's another divine act thing. Okay, the characteristics ranked by frequency of occurrence from most to least common are summoning is number 1. I don't read that much manga as far as like isekai manga. I mainly just watch isekai anime, but I can't think of one where like someone in the new world summons the people actually there. Okay, so no explanation is 23%, reincarnation 21%, divine act 20%, and then okay, so honestly those 4 are all kind of pretty close together, and that makes sense because those middle 3 are probably the ones I've seen the most. Stories with a teenage protagonist favor summoning, but stories with adult protagonists do not. Reincarnation or no explanation are favored in stories with adult female, and divine acts for stories with adult male. That's weird. Certain mechanisms require the protagonist to die while others do not. Adults of both genders have a higher probability of dying as part of entering the isekai than teenagers. Oh boy, that's not good for me. Just remember everyone, trucks are vehicles. They are not magical. Just keep that in mind. Never forget that. Entering the world as a group is problematic. Unless the group had strong bonds prior to entering the isekai, the protagonist almost always separates from the group after entering the isekai. I guess a good example of that would be like Campfire Cooking. He's summoned with a group, and within the first 3 minutes, he's just completely leaving the group behind. Summoning is also often a negative event. Of the 117 manga series where summoning occurs, about 2/3 are either malicious or unintended. That's like 75 freaking manga. That's a lot of manga where it's a malicious summoning. That's a pretty specific thing too for there to be that many of them. Even when the summoning is positive, the protagonist typically rejects the purpose that they are summoned to perform. As a result, in only 6% of the summoning stories do the protagonists perform the tasks for which they are summoned. That makes sense. I've heard of a lot of isekais where you're teleported to the new world, and you're supposed to do something, but then the protagonist is just like, yeah, fuck that noise. I'm just going to do whatever I want, which is probably what I would do if I was in that situation. The nature of the isekai in the vast majority, 88% of the surveyed manga series is based on a specific role-playing game and includes many of the game elements listed above. 88% of 427. That is huge. I can't believe there's that many. Oh, like, yeah, I can, but it's just lame to hear. I wish things were more unique than that. The largest fraction of the stories, 68%, are in standard shonen isekai, 15% in the standard otome isekai, an additional 5% in isekais that differ from the two standard worlds but include many of the game elements listed above. Okay, you know what? I've actually been watching a couple of those otome ones. One I watched recently was I'm the Villainous, so I'm taming the final boss. I thought that one was kind of cute. I like that one, actually. There's another one I've been wanting to watch. It's like My Next Life as a Villainous, All Roads Lead to Doom. I've heard that one's good. But those otome ones, I've actually been trying to watch those, and they're pretty entertaining. I kind of like them. Okay, as would be expected, 84% of protagonists entering the standard otome isekai are female, and 83% entering the shonen isekai are male. I guess an example of a male protagonist entering an otome isekai would be trapped in a dating sim. The world of otome games is tough for mobs. I get, because the whole plot of that is about being a mob character in an otome game as a guy. The protagonist receives gifts, cheats upon arrival in the isekai in 2/3 of the manga series. That is how often they have to be OP. You know, I think I said this in my Grimgar video, but it's just like a lot of these isekais are all framed around the fact that you're OP, because you wouldn't be able to get away with a lot of the stuff that these people do in the shows without being OP. Like, you almost have to be OP in order for the exploration of the isekai to even happen. In a lot of the isekais I've seen where you're not OP, it's usually freaking awful. So, like, in order for you to even satisfy escapist fantasy, you have to be OP. So I think that's why so many of these freaking manga take place with an OP protagonist. A small number of stories, 7%, simply focus on survival. So, like, Grimgar would be an example of that one. I think, because that one's like the super gritty, realistic isekai. In the computer games, motivations are sometimes defined in terms of a quest. In about 20% of the isekai manga, the protagonist adopts a quest. More common motivation, however, is to fulfill personal desires that the protagonists bring with them from their lives in the real world. These include living an easy life or achieving a personal goal. So, like, I guess like farming life in another world would be a good example of that kind of motivation. He just wants to be a farmer and have a good agricultural life, I guess, because he was interested in agriculture in his previous life. These occur in 53% of the stories, and protagonists who were adults in the real world are motivated by personal desires more often than those who were teenagers. Yeah, that checks out, because, you know, teenagers are less realistic. In 5% of the stories, the protagonists choose to simply help people. Lame. 3% follow antisocial motivations, such as becoming a sexual predator or enacting violent revenge. A larger fraction of male teenagers fall into this last category. Jesus Christ, that 3% is honestly more than I would hope for with this category. As discussed above, the great majority of protagonists enter the isekai alone, or if they enter with a group, they quickly separate. Once in the isekai, however, protagonists tend to form groups where they are the central individual. These groups are built by purchasing slaves, saving damsels, creating harems, and obtaining followers and teammates. Marriage is rare, and when it occurs, it is often polygamous. Yeah, I guess a couple examples of that would be like In Another World with My Smartphone would be one like that. Food plays a prominent role in 18% of the stories. Like, once again, campfire cooking. Food is like a major thing. Okay, so that pretty much hits the big findings of the survey and everything like that. It seems the rest seems to be a summary of the findings and conclusions. That's great. We've kind of already talked about that. I've been kind of like making my own, findings about this data. But this was a really interesting like dissection of this. I would never put in the effort to do this massive of a survey myself. So it's really interesting to see just like this statistical data on isekai stuff. Like I said, I don't really read isekai manga all that much. I mainly just watch anime. So there's probably like a lot more cookie cutter stories out there than just what I can see in anime. But so this was really interesting. There's definitely trends that like I probably could have determined without doing this just from the amount of isekai anime I've seen. But it's really giving you some perspective on the genre itself when you see like these numbers and like how like 88% are freaking in game worlds. Like, come on, man. So like that makes the ones where they aren't in game worlds, like Tanya or Drifters, like way more interesting. And I think that's why I love those two isekais so much, is because they're in very unique worlds. You know, Drifters is a fantasy world, but it's not gamic, and it has, like, you know, with historical people in it. Tanya, of course, is basically our world, Europe. So I mean that's why, you know, but there's no games and stuff like that. I guess this could go two ways. You can either be one, you know, kind of inspired by the ones that kind of deviate for these norms, or two, you could be disheartened by how generic our genre is. But I mean, I really had a good time breaking this down. This was fun. Thank you for sending me this. What did you guys think of this survey? I encourage you guys to read it yourselves. Like I said, I didn't break down every little thing here. There's a lot of really good stuff. I would love to do like read more research papers on just like anime in general. I didn't even know like there were research papers on anime. I gotta get into stuff like that. This is really cool. So guys, what did you think? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. There's gonna be a lot of debate, I'm sure. I would love to discuss it more with you guys. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, please don't forget to hit that like button on your way out. And if you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know, and it'll let you know when I post in the future. With that being said, I want to thank you all for watching to the very end of the video, and I will see you all next time. Bye.